Yo, it's Dohrok here, and today I'm wondering what's the future for Lost Ark going to look like. I brought up a lot of issues that I see in Lost Ark in my last video called How I Got a Plus 25 Weapon and how you definitely can too. And there were a lot of positive reactions to that video, and almost everyone agreed with the points that I was bringing up. But there were also a fair amount of people that commented that they didn't even watch the video, but knew it would just be scam advice and downvoted it immediately. Which in a way helps emphasize my point, because these people were almost upset that someone could be so egregious to even suggest that a plus 25 weapon is reasonable to farm. And that's exactly the problem I wanted to bring up. And I want you to know we agree with each other. But there were also a fair amount of people that added to this discussion quite a bit, and I've been trying to engage with those people from all different perspectives in the comments and over on my stream, twitch.tv/DJ and seeing points that I didn't get to cover very well in my last video. But I want to go a little bit deeper into some of these talking points in this one. First, I want to start by bringing up my alt roster. The point of me bringing up my alt roster in my last video was not to show some secret tech to farming gold. The point was to show how long it takes to build up a new account. Even as someone with 21,000 in-game hours in Lost Ark, it still took me 9 months to complete a roster of 6 characters in tier 4 and finish LOS 30. That's with 6 to 7 different events happening to help new players. And I'm sure some people will argue otherwise, but I'd say it's safe to assume that I have quite a bit more game knowledge after 20,000 hours playing the game than a new player trying the game out, or even a returning player who hasn't played in a year. If it takes 6 events over the course of nearly a year to play the game properly, do we think that this is reasonable? I'm going to say no. And this really helps explain why new or returning players are having such a hard time that they're ultimately quitting the game before that point. And there's further points surrounding this that I didn't really get to touch on in my last video. Like, how not every event is equal. Depending on when you started or start playing the game, you may or may not have a good or bad event to help bring you up. On top of that, some of the rewards, like a Relic Engraving Selector from the Ignite server, just cannot be obtained by newer players. And I think it's understandable that a new player is going to miss out on past events, but if the events are used in a way to catch global up to Korea, then it needs to be taken into account for future events where new players are starting even further behind. Which, I've seen a lot of people wanting Ignite servers back, or making it some sort of permanent addition. And as much as I want to agree, I believe that the massive oversight on the exploits used during Ignite made it such a headache for AGS that a lot of trust was lost in an event like this, and I'm not sure AGS is going to risk that happening again. But I would personally like to see the Ignite servers come back as a permanent addition, because there were a lot of good things about it. So what were all of the positive things about the Ignite server though? The character that was built from the Ignite server didn't suck. I really want to emphasize this because the following 2 events after the Ignite server left players with crap rat characters. And on the Ignite server, there was an incentive to stay on the Ignite server until you reached 1620 item level. And this came in 2 different forms, one being that the gift you got when transferring at 1620 contained the Relic Engraving Selector chest, as well as more mats and stuff like 200,000 bound gold. But also, you had increased quantities of mats from dailies and raids, honing costs were reduced, and the honing chances were better on the Ignite server. And because it was a fresh server, all of the previous roster-wide vendors were restocked and could be utilized to push with. That meant that tripods weren't really an issue, because you could either buy the Hope Amulets from the vendors on Ignite, and then when you transferred, you could buy them again. And all of it was really doable in about 2 or 3 weeks, and it could be done playing alongside your main roster. Basically, Ignite servers were good because it was actually reasonable to catch up a new character to the current content, which this is the root issue that people are looking for a solution for. It feels impossible for most people to feel caught up. So while it wasn't perfect and it had its exploits, it was still much better than the following events where they didn't even bother to give out more than 3 Hope Amulets for. So would a permanent addition of the Ignite servers be good? And how would it really work as a permanent addition? I think this system could be used in a very positive way, but first, I want to think about how it could be exploited, or how would degenerates use it to push further ahead. I think if there's a 1 character limit per account on the Ignite server for transfers, then it can't really be degened that hard. You can make an argument that people can make more accounts and get the free characters to push with, but that's what people are doing with events now. What's stopping them at this current time? Usually it's the time investment. Most people just don't want to invest that much time into it. And maybe people will bring up that the transfer gift had 200,000 bound gold in it. So just change the gift. If that's the biggest concern, the biggest benefit from the Ignite server was the character at the end. Extend Ignite servers to go through A-Gear as well. Keep it progressed as more solo content comes out. Because as a new player, if you start on the Ignite servers, then when you transfer over to a main region, you can use the power pass from whatever the current event is that's going on. And you could have 2 usable characters in a few weeks rather than a few months. Which I have to bring up trusted status, because trusted status makes things a lot more difficult for new players. No one really seemed to know what it takes to get trusted in Lost Ark. I got trusted on my alt account after 50 hours in-game playtime, but it was a new account and I had just reached the Punica storyline. I hadn't finished Punica, but I just started it. I've had other people tell me that they got trusted after only 7 to 8 hours, but they've had the Steam account for a lot longer. What we do know is that Steam Trusted is not the same as Lost Ark Trusted, and there's probably multiple checks on an account to receive trusted status. It seems like the best way to get trusted is just to make a new character and start playing the story until you get it. But there's kind of like this shroud of mystery as to what gets you trusted status that makes it just kind of annoying. And if the point of that is to hide the requirement from bot farms, just do better about the bot farms. Quit making new players' lives worse because bots exist. But this was one of the nice things about the Ignite server. You didn't need a power pass. You just made a character and it was automatically granted the equivalent to a Voltus power pass. And the 1 character transfer limit does act as a bottleneck to bots creating new characters and then them moving to popular servers to farm on. The only real negative that I would see from having this server as a permanent addition would be that it would be a very low population compared to a main region. And for a new player, this could be a big turnoff. If your first time logging into an MMORPG is walking around the city and you're saying hello in area chat and no one responds to you. Or you ask a question and no one responds to you. And I can make an argument that if the game was more popular, the server would be more popular, and that wouldn't happen, but the game has to not suck first. So this is still a big point to bring up. Which, this can be really problematic for a new player trying to get help in-game, because most people do not immediately go browse through YouTube or know max roll, or they're running to Discord servers, or know about the Nexus guides when they've only been playing the game for a few weeks. So when they ask a question and they get no answer, it can be very demoralizing to play the game. And I think that could easily be assisted with just maybe a notice when you make a character that says, this is the Ignite server, this is intended to be a fast-paced progression experience for new players to ease into the game. Something like that, so players know that this is going to be a primarily solo experience until you transfer. Which also makes me bring up the fact that Deadzone was a challenge during Ignite, and it was not solo content. But it is now, and I think Ignite should just be kept current with solo content if it were to be implemented permanently. The Ignite server was a good event for a new character, but this only brings up 1 character in the end. This doesn't really address the issue with the huge hurdle of 1600 to 1620 on any future character after that. There is just no reason for it to cost gold to get to tier 4 at this point. You can barely earn gold below 1620. Why are you expecting players to have 300,000 gold per character on a 30,000 gold per week income? And someone in my last video brought up a great point that I need to bring up here as well. The cost that I previously gave for honing is just the crafting cost of honing without an event. This isn't including the price of fusion mats. Even below 1580 where silver honing ends, you still need gold because you need fusion mats to hone still. The crafting cost is reduced to silver, but you can't make fusion mats without gold. Going back to trusted status for new players, they might only be limited to a very small amount of solo mode gold per week because they can't use the market. So you go spend your life energy every 2 days and you make enough fusion mats to get 10 item levels, but now you spent all of your money making the fusion mats, so you have to go farm more raids for a few more weeks to even do the hones. Which I then would need to ask, what's the point of gold cost on any of these tier 3 systems that are brought over to begin with? Why is it that on the emergency livestream, they only chose to reduce Transcendence cost by 30%? Just make it cost silver at this point. The only people that are still working on it are brand new characters. The same can be said about elixirs. Get rid of fusion mat cost on honing up to tier 4 too. It's unnecessarily restrictive. Which this still presents a big problem that affects everybody, but is significantly worse for new players. Which is that there's 27 different classes in the game, and there's a 28th announced and on its way in the near future. I know we have a 6-character gold limit, but as a new or returning player, if you end up investing a bunch into a class that you ultimately don't like after playing it more, this is a huge setback. Because most of the time you use a lot of one-time resources on that character that are very valuable to progression as a new player, not knowing the repercussions of spending those mats. Not to mention that each event is only good for one character. So if you use that event on a character that you don't like, you're punished by having to spend 4 times as much making a new one and have to play that character that you don't like because it makes you gold. And for a lot of veteran players, they've felt locked into certain classes for a very long time because they've invested so much into it. I mean, have you done a raid with a striker main in the past 2 years where they haven't talked about wanting to quit the entire time because they hate their class? And I don't blame them, but I'm going to leave balancing for a later video. The real issue here is that there is a major issue with swapping classes. And there was an emergency livestream in Korea on Friday, which they announced that they were looking at making gem swapping easier. This is easily done by just removing the association of a skill on a gem. Let us pre-assign the skills in a deactivated state on each character, and by equipping a cooldown or a damage gem, we can then activate the benefits, kind of like a talent plan. Now, that way we wouldn't need to re-roll a gem ever. You would just move your gems from one character to the next and put them on, and it's already all done for you. This should have been implemented like 2 years ago. But this still doesn't completely solve the issue with players feeling locked into certain archetypes. And part of this comes from engravings. I know personally I've invested into Ambush Master relic books, but I made a Wild Soul, and I think Wild Soul is pretty fun. But I feel like it's a major setback to try and replace one of my characters with Wild Soul, because I would need to get 1670 at least and get my A gear, and it would just be really expensive and it would take a long time, but I'd also have 2 million gold spent on relic books that do nothing for that character, and I'd be replacing a character where that 2 million gold is actually useful. And that just feels really bad personally. But I know I'm not alone when I feel like it's a huge hassle to swap mains or even maintain a character outside of the 6 gold earners. The gem change would be nice and it would help to some degree, but I think the biggest beneficiary to the gem change would just be the average player's alts, which is good. Because gems are very expensive, and to be able to use gems that you can progress with on your own characters over time is just a huge W. But it still doesn't fix the total problem. There's still no supply increase on gems coming with it, so if everyone just consolidates the gems that they have, we still won't see any real noticeable increase in higher level gems on the market. So while it does help the average player, it doesn't do much for the degenerates. And I'm sure many people will say that's good, and I think this change is positive as a whole. It just doesn't totally fix the problem and will affect the average player later on down the line. Like how everything is still just too expensive. We've had 2 announcements since my last video that I want to bring up. There is the Golden Frog that's coming to global, and there was the live stream on Friday for Korea. Since I was just talking about relic books, let's talk about the frog. I think the frog is going to be exactly what most people expect. For some people, you will make some money, and there will be a temporary increase on the supply of relic books on the market, dropping prices some. This will obviously be temporary, and maybe AGS is hoping that this temporary period will last long enough that people can obtain more and it will also bring a demand decrease when the frog is gone. Now, I don't know if I'm hopeful that there will be a 50% decrease in relic book prices, and I'm not sure if I personally feel they're super worth investing in even with a 50% decrease. And I'll use Raid Captain as an example, because many classes use Raid Captain. Raid Captain is roughly 200,000 gold per book on the market right now, making a 0.8% damage increase worth 1 million gold. If book prices were halved temporarily because of the frog, then we're looking at a 500,000 gold investment for a 0.8% damage increase. This feels like it could be closer to reasonable, but there's still other circumstances to consider. Personally, not all of my alts are 1680, and all of my alts that are below 1680 would get more than a 0.8% damage increase by just honing, and it would cost less. And you can argue that books will impact more than one character, but you can also argue that having a more fleshed out roster allows access to more content. But then accessing more content on your alts means you need to invest more into new progression systems, which is going to take away from you buying the books. And this brings up a point that I made in my last video, where there's this constant battle to figure out which system you need to invest into at certain times. And this is where I say, even with a 50% decrease on relic books, they still don't feel worth it. We know that nothing in Korea or planned for Korea is tuned around having these books. And because there are constantly new progression systems coming out, like the karma system that give bigger damage increases, there really is no point to getting them unless you have everything else done. Which, even for a degenerate terminally online individual like myself, it's fair to say you probably don't have everything else done. And probably feel the same way in that this is a system where it just largely feels not worth investing in. However, there are relic books that people are investing in, which these books really show to me where the average price of a relic book should be for players to feel like they should buy it. The books that people are finished with or finishing now tend to be in the 40 to 100,000 gold range. If we see a 50% decrease while the frog is here, but there's a 25% increase afterwards, then most books will go back into a spot where they're outside of what most people are willing to pay for. And this is going to cause some people to stop doing their other progressions to buy books while the frog is here, because they don't want to miss out on that deal. And this really plays into a mental component with this game that is kind of concerning. I would ask, why are relic books being introduced in the form of a frog, where it's going to be a temporary solution to a problem that's easily fixable in a permanent manner? And it also acts as a gold sink for players when gold is needed more than ever for everything else that they're doing. Why is it that players have been able to obtain 4 free relic engraving books, but the 5th one came in the form of spending $150, and the 6th one came in the form of spending $100? This really plays into people's desire to obtain these things, and the biggest issue here is that the mental manipulation is getting way too obvious. There is a reason why in every discussion recently about the state of the game, there is a growing number of people saying, "End of service is near." And I really hope that to not be true. But they are so obviously milking us at this point with these kind of design decisions. There's nothing stopping Smilegate from just getting rid of the crap engravings in the game that act as fluff. If relic books were just as rare, but there were only good ones, I'm sure we'd see reasonable prices. And if relic books were twice as common, but they kept the crap ones, it would also be much more reasonable. This doesn't seem like the most insane fix to me. Why does the supply increase have to come with a cost to players when it's intended to correct an issue that the developers created? And to people that want to argue that it's because Smilegate doesn't care about global, that's certainly what it feels like. And it's especially what it feels like after the livestream that happened on Friday. And it's fair to say that pretty much every design change in Lost Ark is going to be intended for Korea. But AGS has proven that they are able to do something. But I personally wish they were more transparent about what that something is. Ultimately, we need AGS to communicate to Smilegate that things are not the same in global as they are in Korea. And some design decisions should be questioned when thinking about global that has a more or less established release schedule. And we just don't really know the extent at which AGS can. I think it's largely assumed that AGS has basically no influence at all. But it seems a bit unusual that something like doubling the amount of A-gear mats people get can't be controlled by AGS, when Smilegate is too stupid to realize that we have half the time to go through the content. But at the same time, we've been able to get things like the Ignite server and global and our own emotes. So I think that AGS still has plenty that they can do to help with these problems, and maybe with the next update we'll see some evidence of that. But right now, it's just the addition of the frog that seems to do anything, and I'm not really convinced that this is a lasting solution. And really, it's trying to find a solution to a problem that shouldn't exist. Because why do relic books exist to begin with? Nothing is being tuned around having them, and there's seemingly always a better progression system to work on unless you've spent a stupid amount of money on the game. And again, some people will go, well, that's your answer. They want you to spend more money on the game. But again, if they aren't permabanning the RM tiers, who's getting the money? Which I'll also bring up. How much money are they losing out on by only catering to the top spenders at this point? There are people that spend tens of thousands on this game, but if the game was in better and could retain a better population and had packages that weren't just so obviously milking players, how many more people would spend an extra $100 buying a pack? It's just getting too obvious of a scam, and this is surely making them lose out on money at this point. I'm sure people are still spending a ton, but I'm saying there's still so much potential that they could be taking so much more advantage of players. It just seems odd, very unusual. It feels like there's just incompetence in making game design decisions. Things just are never really fully thought through, and most solutions just act as a band-aid to appease the player base until the next meltdown. That seems apparent in the most recent livestream for Korea. Smilegate didn't address the gap to get to tier 4 at all. They're reducing honing cost for advanced honing, but also nerfing gold from Theamine, Echidna, Behemoth, and Aegir. Global tends to get these gold changes much later, which is how it should be, but still it seems to come way too early relative to the average player's progression. These gold nerfs tend to hurt the average player on global more than they accomplish anything at all. But this makes me bring up a point that's been in a lot of people's minds lately, which is that the content we're doing isn't fun. It's not fun because Theamine 1 through 4 is still a gold earning raid for a character at 1700 if you want to earn the most gold. And yes, you can argue that you get more bound gold, but realistically, if you're raiding on a 1700 character, then you're going to be using the bound gold on that account at some point. And Theamine Gate 1 through 4 is a 1620 raid. Having a group of 1700s do a raid that there's 80 item levels over for so they can get more gold is boring. Most people aren't even hitting the boss, or they're even paying attention to the run at all. On my main, if I take a full group of even 1640s, we still do more damage than is necessary to skip entire phases. And yes, you can say, well, your main is 1705 and you have a plus 25 weapon and level 9 and 10 gems and you're a Deathblade. But you aren't changing the fact that we've been doing Theamine for like a year at this point. It's exhausting. Now people's alts are getting to that point as well. And you can only do Theamine and Echidna a few hundred times before you really start to get tired of it. But this is a drawback from the development cycle that Lost Ark has, since every new raid we get is coming with a 20 to 40 item level increase, and that's the only thing we have to do. Many alts will be doing the same content for a very long period of time. And for most people, that will extend until after the gold nerfs go into place, and it will only hurt their ability to progress. And this was a point brought up in the comments that I didn't bring up in my last video, which is, this is another reason as to why people are running buses. They're just generally bored with doing the same 8-man content because they've outgeared it so much at this point. And since the gap between veterans and new players is widening, the gatekeeping on lower raids that alts are running is hindering new players' mains. And then new players feel like they have to take a bus in order to complete a raid at all. But I'm going to go into another video going into the difficulty of raiding. This video is already getting a little long, and that's a little off topic. I think that there's nothing else really significant in the live stream that happened that's relevant to this video though. Which is a problem. Because what about the 1600 to 1620 grind? What about the increasing levels of gatekeeping being brought on by bad design decisions in raids? We haven't even mentioned how dailies still aren't fun to do. Ever since they've convinced us that reducing 2 Guardians to 1 and making Chaos faster was a temporary solution, they've hit us with too many other bad design decisions to be able to think about it again. Or how side content is really bad, or collection content has largely been forgotten. And why can't I enter a dungeon with less than the max number of players to do old Abyss dungeons? The biggest problem is still retaining new players. Like I said in my last video, if we aren't able to retain new players, then people will inevitably quit, because people have lives and time goes forward, and the game will die because no one is replacing them. And what about the fact that it still takes a minimum 6 different events for a new account to have a roster in tier 4? I think that events at this point should just give 2 power passes and 2 characters to work on for new accounts. You have a system to identify new and returning players. Use it to also give them more stuff to catch up. If the issue is that bots would take advantage of it, then again, fix the bot problem. Quit making new or returning players' lives worse because you don't know what to do about it. If we continue to ignore this part of the game, then it really starts to set a precedence for players on what to expect in the future. I definitely wanted to go further into more topics, but this is a really long discussion, and I want to make sure I get as much perspective involved as I can. So you guys tell me, what do you think about the future of Lost Ark? What do you think it's going to look like? And I'll go a little bit deeper into it in another video. So until next one, dudes. Peace.